I want to talk very briefly about Sophocles and Oedipus Rex. Sophocles was a superstar of the golden age of ancient Athens. Politically and culturally, Athens was a powerhouse. And a lot of what they came up with is with us to this day. A lot of the traditions of modern democracies began there. Athens is often called the birthplace of democracy. And to a fair degree, a lot of the cultural traditions as well, a lot of the art. Sophocles was one of 4 great playwrights of whom we have records. Every year in Athens, there were competitions, festivals, where authors would put on plays, and they would be in competition with one another. It's kind of like the Oscars, and at the end of the festival, they would, award the winner who had the best play. And they actually did rankings and stuff. And we don't have a lot of them. Sophocles wrote roughly 120 plays, I think, that we know of, or we have some reference to or record of. But we only have 7 completing. Completed in its entirety, in their entirety from that period. Which is roughly what we have from the other playwrights. These things weren't necessarily preserved all that well. But the others were just, for reference, a guy named Euripides, a guy named Aeschylus, and those are the 3 great tragedians. They wrote tragedies, which have like a very specific form. And then comedians, the writers of comedy, of which we have the one great example from that era is Aristophanes, who wrote some very funny and very risque stuff, I'll say that. But Sophocles was, even among that company, Sophocles was a standout. He was a superstar. He lived for roughly 90 years. So it was a good chunk of history that he got to watch. And that's really an important key to a lot of the themes in his plays, quite frankly. He writes plays with a sense of scope, with a sense of perspective. And that is an historical perspective, a perspective of, well, yeah, things are good now, but wait and see. Or things are really bad now, but wait and see. That sense that fate is a little unpredictable and often cruel in the long run. All of that informs the plays. And of the 6 plays that we have from him, from Sophocles, of the 7 plays that we have from him, the ones that are the most notable are the so-called Theban plays. Plays built around the legend of the city of Thebes and its primary figure. The city is legendary to begin with, but its primary figure would be Oedipus. Now, if you are a young Greek person growing up in Athens in roughly the year 300 BCE or somewhere around there, you know the story of Oedipus. It's just baked into the culture. Oedipus very famously, as a young man, came to the city of Thebes and was confronted by a monster guarding the city, the so-called Sphinx, which has, attributes of a wild animal, also attributes of a woman, and you can make an awful lot of the association there. But this is a terrifying figure to the populace, and the Sphinx would ask a riddle to whoever came up to it, and if the person cannot answer the riddle or answers it incorrectly, then they would be killed. But Oedipus famously answers the riddle correctly, and it is the famous riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? And Oedipus was able to come out and say, well, a human being, because if the morning represents the beginning of life, childhood, infancy, a child crawls on all 4s at that time. And then when they reach adulthood in the middle of the day, they are walking on 2 feet. And then as an old person, you perhaps need a cane to get around. So that would be 3 feet. It's by thinking abstractly like that Oedipus solves the riddle, and thus conquers the Sphinx and lifts the terror from the city. And everybody in Athens knew that story. So when Sophocles comes and writes plays out of that legend, he's not writing with any great sense of suspense. Everybody knows how it turns out. The other great story of Oedipus is that he was fated at birth, that he would one day kill his father and marry his mother. And then all these machinations take place that he tries to avoid it, and in the end he ends up killing his father and marrying his mother. Everybody knew that too. These are the basic building blocks of the Oedipus myth. And Sophocles can rely on that. Sophocles was able to say, okay, everybody knows that. I'm not going to, hold anybody on the edge of their seats by just saying, in the end, and he did kill his father and marry his mother. That's really not that dramatic. But what the play does that is really quite ingenious is it shifts that to the background. We know that. What it becomes then is an exercise in a different kind of suspense, where the question is not, who was it, or what is the cause of this plague that is haunting this city. It is more a question of when is he going to figure it out. This great figure of Oedipus, who was a hero for his intelligence, for his ability to figure out difficult questions, is stumped. And we, of course, as the audience, fully familiar with the legend, know the story. We know the truth that he does not. So we're in a position of kind of superiority to him. And Sophocles crafts his play in that context, where it builds the suspense slowly, like, okay, he's got to figure it out now. Or how many people have to tell him that, this is true before he believes it. But he keeps resisting that. And you can make all sorts of psychological arguments about why and all of that, and lots of people do make psychological arguments about why and all of that. But from a simple dramatological standpoint, if that's a word, I'm not sure, you can see the control that Sophocles exercises in building that suspense of when will he know. And by shifting the audience into that position of knowing something that the hero doesn't know, of being in a way superior to and smarter than the great genius hero Oedipus, we're able to re-examine everything that we've been told. If we have been told that Oedipus is this great hero genius, and suddenly he just seems like, kind of clueless, well, what else have we been told that isn't quite living up to its standards? What else have we been told that maybe we shouldn't take so seriously? That maybe we should doubt just a little bit? That position of critique is very important. And the ways that Sophocles goes about the drama is a big part of that. Again, the plot is fairly well known. You're not really going to have anybody, extolling the genius of this if all you're doing is regurgitating the story itself. But how you tell it matters. And so he throws out little things along the way that might not seem that obvious, but upon reflection, the kind of reflection that Oedipus was so famed for, that kind of abstract thinking that Oedipus was so well known for in his youth, and that have apparently left him in his maturity, that habit of mind is more and more the point of the whole play. And if you want to see some of the little techniques that that Sophocles is using, you just have to look at the words on the page. At the very beginning, we get Oedipus coming out. It is a simple stage, not a lot of special effects, very stripped down. But there is a door in the middle of the stage in the background, and Oedipus comes out. The door is like the palace, and he is walking out. He is central to the scene. There's a great power in that. There's a great pomp and circumstance in that. And you can imagine all the stuff that, a good modern production would do, where there's swelling music, waving flags, and, a great entourage surrounding him, applauding and cheering, and he is coming out. There is an issue here where a plague has settled in on the city, and he is being called on to deal with this, to figure out, why is this happening? What did we do to piss off the gods that they would do this? There's a lot of references to Apollo. Apollo is the Greek god of, among other things, plagues. And so there are all these appeals like, okay, we have a problem because Apollo seems to be really mad at us. We have to figure out why. And just in the speeches that you get from Oedipus, and there's a priest there, from Oedipus and the priest, you can get a sense of where Sophocles is going with this. Now, just the beginning of the Oedipus speech. Children, young sons and daughters of old Cadmus, why do you sit here with your suppliant crowns? The town is heavy with mingled burden of sounds and smells, of groans and hymns and incense. I did not think it fit that I should hear of this from messengers, but came myself, I, Oedipus, whom all men call the Great. Now, I'm punching a certain word in there, but you can hear it regardless. He is calling on himself an awful lot. He's using the I word, if you will. Very self-centered, very fixed. But it's not just on him, or it's not just him. The priest has this same kind of limited thinking. And just think about these two figures, the king, the monarch, and the religious leader, the priest, are both caught in a very simple way of thinking, a very binary way of thinking. The priest says, "O ruler of my country, Oedipus, you see our company around the altar. You see our ages. Some of us like these, who cannot yet fly far, and some of us heavy with age. These children are the chosen among the young, and I, the priest of Zeus." This simple subject-object way of looking at the world, this simple restricted way of looking at the world is narrow. It's almost as if they have blinders on. Blind is a very big thing in this play. The blinders keep you from understanding alternate perspectives, from understanding, an outside objective view. Oedipus is too close to the problem, quite literally, so he cannot solve it. That pattern of first person, that pattern of the first person persists throughout the play. Oedipus is constantly invoking the I. He has another speech a little further in. It's on my. I forbid that man, whoever he may be, whoever he be, my land, where I hold sovereignty and throne, and I forbid any to welcome him or cry him, meaning to make him a sharer in sacrifice or offering to the gods, or give him water for his hands to wash. I command all to drive him from their homes, since he is our pollution. He is singling out, saying, okay, there is one bad person out there. There is one cause to this problem, and he's out there somewhere, and I'm going to figure out who he is. I am going to find him. I am going to get rid of him, and then everything is going to be fine. The irony, of course, in this is that the problem is not him. It's not outside. It's himself, Oedipus. It is inside. So he is seeking an individual for this contagion that is actually part within him. Well, it is almost entirely within him. The story stays on that note where, there are moments where it's almost painful to watch how obtuse he is. Sophocles is throwing out lines about why things are wrong. Just a little bit further on that, I pray that I myself may feel my curse. That constant reflexivity, because he is in fact the problem. It's not a. It is that constant egging on to reflect upon oneself and one's own complicity within whatever the problem might be. And when we get the blind prophet, Tiresias, coming. Tiresias is another figure who pops up throughout Greek literature in general. And he is a blind prophet, which means he can see the future, but he cannot see physically. Another distinction between the physical world and a kind of spiritual or ideal world. He can see what is not physically there, but he cannot see what is physically there. It's a curious knot. And he comes in, and Tiresias, consider his position. He has a very anxious and increasingly angry king in front of him, and he is being brought before the king. Tiresias knows the issue here, but he doesn't want to say it, because if he says it, he will probably get, invoke the king's anger and be killed as in consequence. So he doesn't want to do that. So he crafts his language very carefully, but again, always pointing back. I tell you, king, this man, this murderer, And the king is, of course, this man, this murder. So that little connection in the words, the closeness of the words, the proximity, kind of gives it away. Whom you have long declared you are in search of, indicting him in threatening proclamation as a murderer of Laius, he is here. Again, this kind of puzzle, another riddle, but it's one that Oedipus cannot think his way out. Now, this is happening many years after the original Sphinx episode, when he was able to think so well abstractly. Maybe, as happens to all of us, we lose a step or two as we get older. Maybe that's the case. But that dramatic irony is so pungent, because we can see it. We're like, oh, we get what he's saying there. We understand. And that is dramatic irony, where we know something that the characters, or at least one character on stage, does not. And that puts us in a different perspective. And that's the perspective that the play is egging on from the start. That irony of vision, not just of the physical vision of Tiresias, but the ability to see things for what they are, to see the truth of things. That perspective that comes, let's say, with a long life, with time. Sophocles was around for some of the most dramatic history of the city of Athens. The wars with Persia, which were very successful and very glorious. The era of the great kings of Athens from the early days, through the evolution of democracy, which was not generally thought of as a good thing in Athens. It was kind of mob rule, because the aristocratic way of doing things, of leadership, was always concerned with what would the gods think is right and wrong. The democratic way of doing things is more, well, what would human beings think is right and wrong? And that tension between the two is all over Sophocles' work. That concern with the perspective. Is this right and wrong in an absolute sense? Is this right or wrong in any ideal sense? Is this right and wrong in a workable sense? All of these questions get swirled around in this. And this is the real text of the play, so that the plot is just sort of, the mechanism that's going along that everybody knows. But the truth of the play is woven into the details, those little fine points, the language that is used, the interactions between the characters, the seemingly benign, comments that get thrown off here or there. These things matter. At the very end of the play, and always look at beginnings and endings. I start at the beginning, don't forget the ending. The very final line of the play, we have a short speech. Let me see, where'd it go? We have a short couple of lines, really. After he has learned the truth, he has blinded himself. Again, a vision issue, where once he can see the truth, Oedipus blinds himself by gouging out his own eyeballs. Very dramatic. The chorus comes on stage and says, in its last lines, "Count no mortal happy till he has passed the final limit of his life, secure from pain." That sense of perspective, that sense of the ups and downs of fate, the turns of fate, and how we are all kind of subject to it, and how we can only act individually so much before fate itself will grind us down. Sometimes lifting us up, sometimes pounding us into the dirt, but it is a struggle. Oedipus tries to do the right thing. He tries to be an upstanding citizen, but fate, from the earliest prophecy of his birth, said, no, you're going to have problems. And there's no escaping that. He tries to live a good life. By all accounts, he seems to be a good king up until that, that last little point there. But it is always contaminated with the inescapable evil. He tries to be good, but his animal nature is always there. The animal nature that led him in anger to kill his father. Think about that kind of bestial reaction and the descriptions we get of the incident at the crossroads, where out of anger he kills his father. And then inescapably, the sleeping with one's mother, aside from all of the mother stuff, and God knows that's been gone over an awful lot, is an incident of animal passions, of lust. So that that hostility of lust and conquest, of physical intimidation and brutality, that is inescapable for Oedipus, who we have to see as a kind of analog of humanity itself. Trying to be something but never quite able, trying to live up to an ideal but never being able to escape a certain animal nature. But all of this is also a lesson, or a kind of a sermon from Sophocles, saying we need to be doing this. We need to be re-examining something. Don't take everything as obvious. Life is more complicated than that. Life is more hidden and in some ways devious than that. Fate can sucker punch you. And from that long perspective that he had, he is always trying to tell people, we need to look more deliberately at everything we do. We need to look more deliberately at everything of our culture. We need to examine everything we take for granted. And that's a perspective of great critique. That's a perspective of great suspicion. But after a time when he was, again, in his youth, told that Athens is victorious, Athens is heroic, Athens is wonderful, aren't we great? And then you get to a later period in his life, the Peloponnesian Wars, which he also lived through largely, where Athens was essentially in a civil war with the other city-states of the Greek peninsula. And it was a grinding, often quite humiliating experience. They came out successful-ish from that, but it was a very different and humbling experience to not be as illustrious and universally acclaimed as you thought. So that critique, that ability to see perspective, the good and the bad, the prominence and the glory and the undercurrent and the ugliness, those forces should always be present to you, and you should never focus too much on one at the expense of the other. You need to be a fully conscious, well-rounded person, taking a skeptical view, perhaps, of everything around you.